And we're live.
We're live
Okay,
after many attempts.
good to be here with you, Torben.
Yeah, and good to be here with all the listeners out there, wherever they are in the world and in their lives.
Yeah, we're pretty grateful that you're listening in. It's pretty nice.
Yeah. So today I thought I would like to talk about appearance, and by appearance I mean the way we look and the way we think about how we look to other people and how we perceive being beautiful, ugly, and all these things. Just kind of like, what is the role for appearance in a conscious person's life? Because our society actually puts a lot of emphasis on appearance. And I know that it's something I've been worrying a lot about in the past. I've thought a lot about what I look like. And I know that's something that a lot of people they spend a lot of time thinking about and agonizing over. So I think it would be an interesting thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty like kind of human thing, right? To worry about how you look and how other people kind of perceive you, and then we get like kind of self conscious, and there's all a lot of thoughts around that. And what was the kind of the catalyst for you going into this today, Tor? And what happened for you to kind of be like, oh, this is important
Well,
to talk about?
well, for the people who are watching on YouTube and can see the video, they'll see that my hair has been mangled by a rabid hairdresser who took off too much. So there was a miscommunication there, and I think a lot of people know that situation. So, and after that, I was like, oh wow, I've had long hair for a while, and now with just one haircut, I got back into the awkward stage, and I'll have to be here for a few months, and that's amazing. So and so I was like I'm feeling kind of self-conscious. I don't look very good like this. And I was like, well, that's going to take at least 2 months or something before I like look normal again. And then I was like, oh yeah, I want to talk about like looks and appearances and self-image, because when this happens to me, I know what to do. And that is that I just stop thinking about how I look, because that's actually not really important. Because And I think this is one of the things I wanted to talk about, is that we don't actually look at what people look like. And if I can qualify that a little bit, it's when you meet someone, you look at what they look like, definitely. Right away
First thing, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, with your first impression, you look at what someone looks like. And but what's so interesting is that after a while, the more you know someone, you start to get a feeling for this person, for their energy, their emotions, the person becomes not just looks, but they become like a living kind of being to you. And when that happens, the way you feel about a person starts to change how you look at them. So if someone is really ugly, but you really like their company, then you actually start to see them as good looking, because how you feel about them is affecting you, and even their flaws. Then if they're super ugly, then actually their ugliness becomes endearing to you, because and an ugly person can be more charming than a beautiful person, because the ugliness can be such a contrast to their charm that it actually strengthens the degree of their charm. It's the same way if you see a very short person, a short man or a short woman who has a lot of presence, then they they can be huge. They can have a huge presence because they've somehow managed to have a presence while being smaller than everyone else, and that actually makes it even bigger. So I'm not discounting that being ugly, if you're really like an ugly person, or ugly is of course a bad word to use, but if people don't appreciate the way you look, or you
Maybe
have,
if you identify yourself as being
but I'll also say that people do get treated differently depending on how they look, right? So I don't
Mm.
want to discount the fact that you can have bad experiences because of how you look, but that can happen if you're really good looking too. But I just want to say that From the moment you meet someone, that moment is the moment where you're actually looking at them the most. From the first second you meet someone, every second you spend with them from that moment on, you will be looking less at what they actually look like, and you'll be seeing more of what they feel like. And that's very interesting, because that should tell you one important thing about yourself, is that you don't need to be self-conscious, because people are not going to be looking at you, they're going to be feeling at you. So people are going to be you're going to look the way you make people feel. So don't worry about your appearances, because other people aren't going to be like staring at you like they're looking at an image and looking for your imperfections. They're going to continuously be looking at you in a way that is decided by how you make them feel and what your relationship is like. And I think that's very interesting, because that allows a person to stop thinking of themselves as, oh, I look like this, whatever, and then to go into being like, now what do I feel like? So the way I feel, that's actually the way I meet people. So I can relax the self-conscious part, and I can just be myself, because that's what people are going to see anyway. They're going to see me. For every moment they know me longer, they're going to see more of me and less of, my face or my body or whatever.
There's a couple of questions that kind of arises to then, and one is like, does this kind of like this feel like, you're talking about how people.
Can I interrupt you?
Yeah.
Can I interrupt you? I would love to hear what do you think about all that? What is your what is your experience with everything I just said? How does that resonate with you, or doesn't?
I can see what you're saying. I kind of resonate with a lot of like the underlying parts of what you're talking about is like a lot about self consciousness and like
Yeah.
self esteem as a person. And I hear what you're saying, and at the same time, what I'm kind of resonating with is this of like, does it depend on how conscious you are as a person to how much you're looking at that person's outside physical shape or their looks or their kind of appearance and actually feeling that person? So is it like, because if we're only coming from one place and looking at the person from that place, and it's kind of to go underneath that with the feeling part that you kind of mentioned. I feel like that's much on a deeper, going on a deeper level, you could say. So yeah. I don't know. Does that make sense? Or
I think that's a really good point. That's why I want your opinion on it as well. Because I didn't think about that, and that's so true. I mean, what I'm saying is mostly true for conscious people, right?
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing to kind of to note is like the more conscious you are, the more aware you are of yourself and like being yourself. So like allowing yourself to, even though you've just got a haircut or I don't know, something's changed in your appearance of some sort, or maybe even how you see yourself is changing. If you can accept yourself and allow yourself just to be who you are, then it also gives that space for the other person to see that part of you. Whereas
Mm,
if you're kind
so
of
true.
focusing on, oh, my hair, and like I'm awkward, or like thinking a lot about, like, I know it's quite common as human beings to think about what other people think about you, and that creates worry and creates kind of like blockages within the energy between two people, right?
Oh yeah,
And so
so much.
if we can, let that go for a second and just accept ourselves for who we are, accept our thoughts and our appearance, and let that person in, basically, then we're also giving them that the other people the space to see us in our truer self or truer form, and not see
And
the
and
yeah.
we're giving them the space to see themselves from that place also.
Mm, yeah,
Because they may not know that they can be perceived as an energetic being and not just as their looks and their mental image, right?
yeah. If they're Yeah, exactly.
There's an invitation if they're ready for it.
Yeah, and it's interesting that invitation is kind of like it's a if you're willing to open it up, then by you opening that space, the other person also can come into um, that energy or that space. But when it's closed from one person, then
Mm.
it doesn't give as much space for the other person to come into that. So then you're kind of blocked or shielded from that because of like how we see ourselves, or if we have a low self esteem, for example, and we just see the imperfections in everything. So that's what we put our attention onto because that's what's coming from within ourselves. And then when somebody is kind of like completely different to that, for example, yourself, and just like lets go of that, and it's just like, here I am, I'm just this authentic being. I've got this, weird haircut going on. Like, did I see? I see it as a weird haircut. Can I just kind of allow myself to have that thought and just look how I look, and still give the presence for the other person to see me, and give them permission to be themselves as well.
And what's so funny is that, for example, right now, the kids are wearing like 90s, 80s style clothes again, right? And these clothes are like objectively ugly. They're made to they're made to be baggy in every part where you could always where it would accentuate the human shape. So where the thighs are, it's just made to make you look stupid, right? But the thing about that is that if you have confidence, you wearing stuff that looks stupid, that makes you look even cooler. And it's the same with if people see my hair and I'm in a space of being like free and natural and charismatic and just not wearing, then people are going to be like, wow, that stupid haircut makes him somehow even cooler. It's like
The
it's like an
contrast of,
iconic, it's like an iconic thing, right?
yeah.
And if I could popularize a style like this, if I was like a celebrity and I was feeling confident about myself, if I thought that was cool because it was lame or whatever, like however that works. So so it really so looks are really there. It's a very relative thing, really.
Mm.
And I remember there was a guy once a guy who was like, he was one of those like coaches for, he helped people, he helped men date women and all this stuff. And he noted this kind of fun thing is that when he was at his absolute best shape and just everything was, he had abs, he had worked out, his diet was perfect. When he was at his best shape, he actually found that he was less attracted to women. But when he was like a little more let go and he wasn't like perfect, he wasn't worried too much, and he ate a bit of pizza and he was just like kind of flowing with life, but he was imperfect. Then women were much more appreciative of him because basically he was giving off that energy, right? Whereas before, when he was like perfect, it was like probably it was intimidating, and they became self conscious because this guy was like
Perfect.
perfect.
Yeah.
But
Or close to
if
it.
you're a little imperfect and you're not worried, then people are like, oh, I love this space. I want to be part of it. I also want to not worry. I also want to like, go crazy and be unself conscious.
Mm. But that's
So
the interesting part is that you almost, at some stage you go beyond the appearance to the person. And
yeah,
that's what I hear you kind of going into now is,
that would be the essence of what I've been trying to say. That's really what it's about. Like you go beyond if you can. It's like with everything in the spiritual path, you can allow it to be as it is. You'll go beyond it. You'll be bigger than it, right?
mm,
But it's interesting when you talked about unconscious people because I think it's very true that they don't see it that way. But the interesting thing is an unconscious person can't necessarily even see what you look like because they are behind filters. So they probably aren't even able to see what you look like because they're looking at everything through some very deep filters.
how would you, what would you do to kind of help, not even help, but like if somebody is unconscious like that and they have like these thick filters, like you're talking about, what would you suggest to kind of start with, to being more conscious, to letting those filters go, kind of seeing clear, we're just, yeah, being more confident,
So
I
I
guess. So.
So I'd like to get a little bit technical here. So this is going to get a little technical, and then I would love to hear your opinions on this afterwards. So, of course, the easiest thing always is if you want a better relationship with the world, then create a better relationship with yourself, right?
Mm.
So I would say if you're an unconscious person listening to this, which means you got the wrong door somehow, but if you're growing in consciousness and you're listening to this, and you want to know how to perceive the world, people more like energy and less like these harsh judgments and so on.
Yeah.
Then
Or
I
even
want to
if
talk.
it's like maybe you're some really close friends or family to you, and you're
Yeah,
listening to this, and you're like, I want them to get this. I want them to kind of understand this stuff, and to yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I can't help you with that.
Okay, keep going.
I can't help you with that, but you can. It says in the Buddhists have a saying that even if you take a horse to the river, you can't make it drink, right?
Yeah, famous
So
saying.
so teaching people is that depends on what they want to do. But if a person wants to experience themselves without this self consciousness, because that's what it is, I want to get a little bit technical. So when I was young, I would notice that because I was extremely self conscious when I was young. So I would notice that I was carrying around this image of what I looked like in my head, and then I would have this idea of what I looked like my face mainly, but also my body. So I would have an idea of myself. So we call this the self image. I would literally have an image of myself in my head. So I would go around along with people and I would be like, what is my self image? And I would have this inner image of myself, this picture of myself that I imagined, which wasn't correct. It was just how I perceived myself. And I would be like, is this person good enough for the person I'm talking to right now? Right.
Mm.
And if I didn't feel like it was, I would feel self conscious. I would try to hide my flaws, or maybe I would try to overcompensate or whatever. But I would constantly be looking at the self image, which I don't know, somewhere up here or whatever. And I would be conscious of that. So I would be self conscious. And as you said, it's very hard to be in a conversation with someone when you're self conscious because a lot of your energy is going into what am I looking like? What are they thinking? Blah, blah, blah. So there's always this back and forth between the self image and the actual connection with the person is very limited because I have 50%, 60%, 70% of my attention somewhere else, right? And and so that's a very typical thing people experience. They fall in love with someone, that they get a crush on someone or get interested, and they become more self-conscious, and then they can't be a human around that person. They just completely become like, what do I do with my hands kind of thing, right? And so here's where it gets interesting because I love, like, people talk about spirituality, but they never get very technical. I get very technical. Like, I get down to the little bits of what's actually going on. And so what I would suggest is this self-image you have, you can let go of that. You can let go of seeing yourself as a two-dimensional representation of what you look like that you have to constantly consider when you're in public. You can let go of having an idea of yourself at all. And how do you do that? Well, you just decide to kind of forget that you don't need to keep this in mind. It's kind of like when you're worried about something, you're like, oh, I have to remember this. I have to remember this. But then you're like, you know what? I'm getting tired of worrying it. I'm going to stop worrying about it. So it's the same mechanism. So this self-image, when you realize you have it, you can let go of it. But when you try to do that, there's something in you that's going to tell you, no, you can't let go of this. You're not supposed to. You're not allowed to. So let's talk about that. So your ego has this idea that your ego wants to know what other people think of you. And the reason it wants to do that is because it wants to prevent other people from having an opinion on you that you aren't aware of. So your ego is really scared. This is what your ego is afraid of. And this is so stupid. Your ego is afraid that you're running around, you're feeling good about yourself, you're feeling happy, and then there's someone out there who's secretly judging you and thinking that you look stupid, you're ugly, whatever. So the ego is like, no, I'm gonna be self-conscious. I'm gonna make sure that doesn't happen. If they think I'm ugly, I'm gonna think I'm ugly first, and so they're not gonna surprise me or whatever. So there's the ego always has this idea. It doesn't want the ego is always observing, or it's what is the word? What is the word for, like, when a camera is like
watching, kind of recording, or
Yeah, the ego is always like supervising, like what is everyone thinking, what thoughts are going on, how do we deal with that, how do we preempt it, how do we make sure no one thinks anything, or at least we'll know before they think we're stupid. We'll know that they think we're stupid, and we can be like, oh, it's just a joke or whatever. How do we protect ourselves from negative opinions? So your ego is going to be like, no, you cannot drop your self-image. You cannot stop thinking about other people, because then they might have ideas about you that you don't know, and you're unprotected. But you don't need to be protected if you're already happy. And if you're feeling good about yourself and you're not self-conscious, someone's like, oh yeah, you're going around having fun, feeling free, natural, but I think you're lame and ugly. It's like, well, I feel sorry for you then, because obviously, feeling free, feeling good, the ego thinks you have to like look really good and be someone special to feel good and feel special. And you're not allowed unless you fulfill those roles. And if you've been around unconscious people, they'll reinforce those rules, and they'll tell you, like, you're not supposed to be charismatic and happy and relaxed right now because you don't have the worth to it. And a lot of people grow up in those environments. But you do, everyone, sorry?
no, it's just kind of, yeah, this self-worth kind of thing of it being reinforced kind of really resonated.
Yeah.
Keep going.
So
you do have.
Yeah, so so in the unconscious reality, you need to have a certain human worth, a social worth, before you're allowed to act in a certain way and feel in a certain way. But in the conscious reality, you are actually worthy just as you are. You're always worthy to feel free, natural, feel attractive, feel yourself, feel charismatic, whatever. And interestingly, when you start allowing yourselves to feel that, you become that way, because people are like, whoa, this energy. And that's why when you think back to your childhood, if you grew up in this unconscious thing, there were always people that broke the rules. There was like this ugly dude who everyone found charismatic. There was like this girl who was like, she didn't fit any of the rules, but somehow she was allowed to be that way. Although you were caught in these rules, other people were caught in these rules. So that was because they were able to be strongly enough in just allowing themselves to be themselves. And even when people tried to cut them down, they stayed on a higher energy. And eventually these people on a low energy, they were like, okay, well, this person is coming from a higher authority. They have happiness. We have to shut up and respect their place in the hierarchy. But of course, there are no hierarchies in the real world. So when you get out of that. So self-consciousness comes from the fact that monitoring, that's what I was looking for. So self-consciousness comes from the fact that the ego says, I have to monitor my social status, because I don't, there will be negative repercussions. Well, mostly there won't be negative repercussions. And even if there are, then if someone is going to be like, oh, you're not allowed to have fun, to be relaxed, to feel charismatic, to feel beautiful, whatever. Okay, let that person do that. I mean, whatever. You don't really want people like that in your life. Maybe you'll have to set a boundary. You'll have to do whatever you want to do. But so what? So what if someone thinks you're actually a stupid dumbhead if you're enjoying life and if you're flowing from your energy? So the first step of all this is recognizing I have a self-image, which is usually a two-dimensional picture in your head, literally a self-image of yourself. And the second thing is to recognize that I can let go of that, but there is fear in that, because my ego wants to monitor and control and to avoid negative reactions from others. And that this is a fictional reality, because if you're in a place where people are reacting negatively to you being your best self, you need to get out of there. Or if you can't get out of there, you just need to stay in that until they just realize that that's how you're going to be. So because a lot of people like dance like no one's watching. People talk a lot of shit in the spiritual life, but they don't go into how does this actually work, like on the finest level, the mechanical level. How does this all work? So this is how it works. We literally have self-images, and when we're conscious of them, we become self-conscious. And when we're self-conscious, we feel awkward. Our attention is out of the moment, and that makes us less attractive, and it makes us enjoy the interactions much less, and we're not feeling the other person at all either. So there's nothing good in it. If we let go of the self-image, of being self-conscious of the self-image, then we go back to being what we really are, which is like a dynamic energy in the moment. So
Gone very technical, Torian. That's awesome.
yeah, and so I would love to hear like what is your hearing all that. What is your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I was going to say like I'm not much more to add upon what you said because it's very to me, hopefully, people listening in also is very very clear what you're saying, and you can, if you follow that, you hopefully able to see that in your own life as well. So I guess like my thing would be like, as you were talking about that, I was recognizing and resonating on how that works in myself, in my life, and that it happens very often. this
Yeah.
self image, and I mean more clearly, when times when I'm like, I don't know, about to talk in an audience or something, or dance when nobody else is dancing, or these kind of things where like it's it's clear that I'm self conscious, or but then it's interesting to hear you saying this of like when you can let go of that self image or the self consciousness part of you, like, and just kind of be yourself and be dynamic or be fluid or be energetic or be whatever you're being in that moment, then it's you know that's pretty freeing, right? That's like that's pretty conscious living. So yeah, and I can also kind of resonate in times of my life when I have been in that kind of energy as well, where I've just like not cared about what other people think at all. I just like, this is me, this is who I am, and I'm just gonna be that self. And kind of, if people don't like that, that's their thing, But I can still be myself and just uh, yeah, share that. So yeah, pretty pretty cool stuff, pretty powerful stuff for people like listening into this, and like, and it's clear to see like you can take this and then apply it like straight into your life and just see what happens, right? As like an experiment or something fun to kind of play with.
Oh yeah.
And also, if you do like kind of experience a lot of this worry about what other people think, which is very natural to for that to happen, right? Now here's like a very clear, like precise tool that you can use in that moment, um, and start working with that with yourself, with your own self esteem and self consciousness.
Yeah. And it's interesting because everyone knows the feeling of being self-conscious and everyone knows the feeling of not being self-conscious, because no matter who you are, you have moments where you feel self-conscious and you have moments where you just feel free. And for some people, they only feel free when they're alone or with their pets or whatever, but they know the feeling
Yeah,
of not being
it's the same.
self-conscious. And the thing you have to understand is that being self-conscious is not natural. Like a dog doesn't run around with an idea of a dog in its head about what that dog is being looked like, perceived by everyone else. That's insane. Like, I'm here, but I'm also thinking about how everyone is looking at me and trying to control that. Like, that's why we love dogs or animals, because they are not self-conscious. They don't have a self-image. So it's a very unnatural state to be in, because you're here, but you're also here. You have a brain on top of your brain thinking about your brain, whatever. This is extremely unnatural, and that's why that's why we dislike it so much. And 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 everyone loves being unself-conscious. Everyone hates being self-conscious, and now you understand what it is and what the process is. That's with a lot of things in the spiritual life. The only barrier is fear. If you can allow yourself to lower your guard and be like, yeah, there will be people out there who are judging me, and I'm not gonna have a self-monitoring process that is trying to keep tabs of all that. And there are going to be people
Control.
who are, yeah, exactly, ego and control, right? It's always control. And another thing is, I'm not going to be, that's another thing that a lot of people grow up with, is they get attacked. So the ego is like, by doing this self-monitoring of how other people think, we'll be able to preempt attacks. We'll be ready for attacks in one way or another. But you don't need to be ready for attacks, because that's being in a stressful situation. That's a fight or flight survival situation. It's really bad for you to be in a ready to be attacked state. It's not spiritually good for you. It's not physiologically good for you.
So what would be the other state then to be in? If you were
Well,
if you did if you are used to trying to control how other people react or and preempt like their judgments or their things or go into all this and basically worry, right? And then plan for these things. Um, what would be the opposite of that?
the opposite is feeling safe and at home in the world. It's feeling safe, feel like, I can be myself. I'm not in danger. I can
Mm.
express myself freely, and I can just be me, and I don't have to worry at all. And so most people have some friends where they can do that. Some people don't have any situation where they can do that because they're very much in their heads. And for that, you have to let go of some of that way of being. But a dog feels safe in the world. A child feels safe in the world. Everything that is beautiful isn't self-conscious. And in the Bible, Jesus says you have to become like little children again. And that's why. That's the same thing. The mind of a child is not self-conscious. And then when self-conscious, they become teenagers, self-conscious comes in, and everything becomes very difficult. And if we are parents, then we see that process. And if we're not parents, we've been through that process, the awkward self-conscious stage. And while part of the human evolution into spirituality is to let go of self-consciousness, the path, every human takes this path, which is called unconsciousness, and then to self-consciousness, and then to pure consciousness. That's the evolution you're supposed to have. When you're unconscious, you don't think about yourself at all. You're like an animal. So a lot of people, we all have that when we get born. And at some point we become self-conscious. There's like, oh, we're out of the dream. We're like, oh shit, what do I look like? What do I sound like? Like it's overwhelming, because suddenly we're self-conscious. All our emotions, we're looking at all our emotions, all our thoughts, everything is being monitored. Everything is being stopped. We're like, oh no, you can't go through, or you can pass. You're good enough. You're not, whatever. And then through spirituality, we move towards consciousness, which is like it's like unconsciousness is that we aren't considering anything. We aren't feeling self-conscious. But in the conscious thing, we see everything. The unconscious, we weren't aware of our emotions and thoughts. In the conscious, we're aware of everything, but we're not putting a stop to anything. We're not picking and choosing. We're not saying, anger is bad, but happiness is good. We're not picking and choosing. Everything is just allowed to be. We're in total acceptance of ourselves. So we're free like a child, but we are awake like an adult. So we get the best of the both. And to traverse that path, we have to go through self-consciousness, which is a very painful state. And the spiritual path always starts because self-consciousness. When an unconscious person is a child, they become self-conscious when they become a teenager, and then they become unconscious again. That's the path of the unconscious person. But
I
the
was going to
conscious
say,
person,
like, what about if you get stuck in these
yeah.
or go
But the
between
unconscious
the?
person becomes a teenager, becomes self-conscious, and the self-conscious never goes away, because they can't go back to being unconscious, because they're a conscious person. They're on a spiritual path. They must rise up. They can't go down again. So they become self-conscious, and they become older, and they keep being self-conscious, and like, oh, this is terrible. And then at some point they're like, well, I have to get out of this. And then the spiritual path starts, and then you stop. Then you start to let go of the self-consciousness. You move towards pure consciousness.
And you become more aware when you are doing that, when you are doing self-conscious,
Yeah.
when you are self-conscious, or you are, yeah, stuck in that. I love that, like the unconscious, self-conscious, pure consciousness kind of. It's really a clear map kind of thing. For,
Yeah.
yeah.
And you once joked that you once joked that if we were to get on TV, I would become self-conscious or something. I don't remember what the joke was, but you were like, yeah, let's see when we get on TV. And because you get self-conscious sometimes, and I do as well, of course, but I'm just better at recognizing and letting go of it because I practice it, right?
Yeah,
I know as soon as I have this 2D image of myself, I'm like, no, fuck that. I'm not gonna.
it's time to let
You know,
go.
I'm just letting go because I'm just this energy. I don't know where I am. I'm just everywhere and nowhere, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting how when we're talking about it, it gets more and more clear. I don't know if like that's the same if you're listening in and not us talking right now, but it's like literally by you kind of talking about these things, or like it's like kind of sinking in and becoming much clearer, even whilst I'm sitting here. Like when I'm catching myself being like self conscious and then coming back into like aware of that. And yeah,
Yeah,
but it's pretty. I just want to say like how powerful this is for people who have spent so much of their life and energy in trying to control what other people think of them, or trying to control being like yeah, basically everything around them, and then this kind of beginning of letting go of that and just being able to be themselves in that moment, and how much less energy that takes, and how much more freedom that can give your life and you as a person, and just kind of like the you know just the yeah it's a pretty big thing for people to work with in yeah, in letting go. So
yeah.
is there anything you want to add to that, Tobin?
No, I was just thinking about how important it is, and also how when you start to do this, if you've really been doing it, it's this when you. I want to emphasize that when you start letting go, it's an ego death. So because the self image is a huge part of your ego, so it can be very scary. There is some fear to confront. There is some pain to feel, because what you were taught as a child was, if I'm not monitoring, someone's going to come up to me and say, oh, you're being too free, you're being too happy, you have to stop doing that. That's what took you out of it to begin with, but people were commenting on your behavior. So you've learned on a traumatic level that I have to catch myself before other people do it. So basically, you're learning to be self-critical to preempt other people's criticalness.
Judgments. Yeah.
And so when you start to let go of that, you get back to that trauma that reminds you of the original time where you were free and happy, and someone came and said, "Not good enough." And probably this person, perhaps it was reasonable. Perhaps your parents were saying, you're playing on the road where there are cars. You can't be unself-conscious here. You have to pay attention. That's not a bad thing. But maybe you were enjoying yourself in school and someone was like, oh, you're not good enough to do that, whatever. That's a bad thing. But either way, as you let go of your self-image, you are reminded why you created in the first place, because it's a compensation mechanism for a trauma that happened. And so you have to kind of go through some of that pain, some of those thoughts, because the mind will be like, no, we learned that this is dangerous. You can't do this. Well, you learned this at a time where you were young and in a very different situation. Now you're an adult, and so the situation is different. And a lot of our traumas always happen in childhood, where we're small and weak and defenseless. But then we have this big, strong adult walking around with the same trauma, which are now irrelevant because you're an adult. You have the intelligence of an adult. You have the strength of an adult in many ways. So whenever you become more conscious, you'll usually have to face some pain because it was a trauma that made you live incorrectly to begin with. Because self-consciousness is not a natural state. It is a state you go into because you're trying to avoid pain. The truth is, if someone comes to you and tells you, well, you're unself-conscious, I don't like that, then that's fine. they're they're allowed to feel that way. You can put down a boundary, or you can punch them, or you can walk away, whatever is appropriate in the situation.
Maybe
um,
not punching them would be.
well, that depends. That depends on, life comes at you in all kinds of ways, and it requires you to be free and spontaneous, and sometimes you have to punch people. Just don't do it when you're going to get arrested or when it's the wrong thing to do, but you have to be free. And you are, when you're unself-conscious, you're free. And that's why it's so scary for society, because what will a free man and a free woman, what will they do? No one knows. That's why they want to stop that shit, right? We got to stop that shit because it's uncontrollable.
And it's
And
outside
when
of the rules, outside of society, outside of
yeah,
what
and when
people.
unconscious people are free, they fuck things up, right? That's why the Bible has rules. You can't kill each other. You have, like, when unconscious people are un, are unself-conscious, they become impulsive, and they kill each other, they fight each other, they rape each other, and they steal from each other, whatever. So that doesn't work. So that's why we have laws, we have rules, and those are the ones that make us self-conscious. Because now it's like, oh yeah, I have to monitor myself, have to make sure I don't do this or that or whatever. But as we become conscious, we have empathy. And so empathy transcends all laws and all rules, because it tells us that other people are beings just like us. That naturally stops us from doing bad things to them. So now we have the highest law, which is empathy. And we can be unself-conscious again, because having empathy, we're not going to do anything to hurt people. And if we accidentally, in our freeness, make the joke that hurts someone's feelings, then we can just say, that's not what I was trying to do, and I apologize for that, or whatever. So these rules do exist for a reason. There is a reason why there are different interests in why humans have been stifled like that. We don't want them to be free and be natural. Sometimes it was for power. A lot of times it was because of fear. Sometimes it was a legitimate reason, because early civilization had a lot of problems. But a conscious person does not need rules, because the highest rule is empathy and awareness. That takes care of everything, because empathy regards every being as something like yourself. And awareness is the ultimate intelligence, which tells you whether something is foolish or wise to do.
So if you have those two things, then you're pretty set.
Yeah. So all this stuff. What is this? What comes to you, Jonathan, about all this stuff? Because I want to hear what does this make you think about? I think that's what the listeners want to hear as well. This is my my version of things. But how's that for you?
Well, it's pretty true, right? Like it's so not much.
Where do you agree? Where do you not agree? What are your responses, your reactions to it?
But the interesting thing right now is that I don't have that much like reactions to it, because I just kind of see it as, well, not the punching back part, but like in general, like what you're saying, there's so much truth in that. So it's like whatever I say right now is maybe just going to say the same thing, right? So it's and it's very clear as well. So it's I only resonate with what you're saying, Dylan. So
yeah.
I know that's not me answering the question, but it's
No, whatever you have is the right thing, right? Because that's what you have.
Yeah, but not much comes right now. But it's interesting that this when you kind of came to this point of like that, you're saying that empathy and awareness takes care of everything. It's a pretty interesting thing, because I think we commonly kind of think that we need to have a lot of rules and a lot of kind of we need to be like kind of certain about things before going into it. So we need to have a plan. We need to be like all this stuff. But actually, like what you're saying, what I experience as well is that like when you are very aware and when you are very sensitive to yourself and the people you're with, or like to the environment that you're with, then what comes to you in that spontaneous moment is the true action for that moment, because it's responding purely from the environment that you're in, or the energy that you're in, right? So it's like if you're aware and conscious enough to respond from that place, then that there's so much in that. So yeah.
Yeah. That's all you're ever tasked with, is just tend to this moment, because right now you have everything you need. You can't fix the future, you can't change the past, but this moment right here, God or the universe or life or whatever you want to call it, it gives you everything you need to manage this right here. Because it's just, what is right now, and you can manage that perfectly just with what you have and what there is.
Sometimes you just kind of need to like take a step back from the mind, or the kind of reactions, or the kind of impulse, because as you talked about earlier, it's like there's these stages of unconsciousness, self-consciousness, pure consciousness, and at times we come from all three of those are different depending on the level of stress or level of who the person is, whatever. But when you become aware that you go to react, or you go to kind of be when you realize that you're self-conscious, or that you are having this self-image, then that's enough in itself just to be able to be aware of it, and then accept yourself for who you are and let go of that, and then it frees up so much energy just to be, and to share that deeper part of you that you are, and to be free to kind of express that, your authentic self, and your true self.
So there are two things that you said that I want to comment on. And the first thing is, a few times you mentioned not using much energy. And here's the interesting thing. The spiritual path can be summed up to one thing, and that is, don't use any energy. And everything and any step you take in using less energy to dealing with yourself and life is you becoming more spiritual. And the enlightened state is just using no energy at all. So it's an incredibly interesting thing, because let's look at it. It's everywhere. First of all, what does it mean to be authentic? Well, that's just being natural. Okay, so that takes a lot less energy than faking things, than monitoring yourself, than picking what's okay and what isn't. Being natural takes the least energy, just accepting yourself. And what about meditation? Well, meditation means that your thoughts are allowed to come and go. You don't think about them, you don't resist them, you don't judge them. Okay, so that's just thoughts coming and going naturally. That's the least amount of energy, right?
Yeah.
Because that you're not doing anything, things are just flowing. And what does it mean not planning for any moment? And what does it mean just being spontaneous and natural, seeing what happens? Well, that takes the least energy, right? So whenever this is a very effective spiritual practice that I used for many years, is that whenever you find yourself using energy, look at what's costing you energy and then let go of it. And this alone, that can be your entire spiritual practice. And it's very effective because it's very clear. Once you start paying attention, it's very clear. Am I using energy now or am I not? Is there effort here or not?
When you
Talking to this
say
person.
when
Yeah.
you say like it's about like, if there's energy there, then like let go of spending the energy on doing that thing, or what do you mean by
They call it effort, because energy, we use that
yeah
in other contexts as well, right?
effort?
If there's effort, let
Yeah.
go of the effort. And so a fascinating thing I discovered, I met this really wise woman who I didn't really understand how deeply what she said to me was until some times had passed. I was meeting up with her. I was early in my spiritual path, and I was trying to figure out, where are other people? Like, how far am I? Where have I actually gone to? And so I was meeting up with her, and very, very wise woman called Maya, she has something called Maya Guiding in Denmark, and you can go to her if you need help. She's helped a lot of people, especially women. But she said to me that I was a good listener, she told me. And then she told me something which totally pulled the rug under me. She said, the things that we are best at is usually the things that we are worst at. And I was like, and that bothered me. And I didn't like that at all. And I was like, I didn't like when she said that. And it irritated me afterwards. And I was trying to figure out what she meant by that, because she didn't elaborate further. She isn't a hugely intellectual person. That just came to her and she just said it. And upon reflecting on this subject, I realized that I was a good listener because I had practiced becoming a good listener. And the reason I had practiced becoming a good listener is because I was bad at listening, because I always had all these thoughts that were stopping me from listening to the other person. And I realized that to become a good listener, I had to spend energy listening. So I had become this very intense listener, but I was using effort on listening. And then I realized that because I was bad at listening, I'd used a lot of practice to get good at listening. And I'd come to a point where through a lot of effort, I had become a really good listener. And then I realized, wait a minute. I was walking down the road and I heard the birds in my ears, and I wasn't trying to hear the birds. I was like, wait a minute, right now I'm hearing the birds and I'm not trying to listen at all. And then I was like, holy shit, listening does not take effort. I have become good at doing something through effort, which doesn't require effort at all. So being a really good listener, which a lot of people have told me, was actually because I was really bad at listening. And so after that, I spent a long time trying to practice and understand this, that listening doesn't take effort. And now when I listen to you, for example, it takes no effort because listening is natural. Listening happens whether I want it to or not. So I learned to allow listening to happen. And now when I listen without effort. And now I've become a true master of listening in realizing that nothing is required to listen. So whatever you're really good at, try to find out, are you actually good at it? Or is that actually the thing that you're the worst at? And so you have to learn to compensate by using effort.
And for most people, there will be so many of those things in our lives.
Yeah.
Right?
And what she said, this woman, Maya, that actually took me to the path of understanding the highest Zen, because the highest Zen takes no energy. So that comment, she's one of those people who she believes she's a clairvoyant, that people like guides talk to her or whatever. Personally, I don't believe in that kind of stuff. I think it's just her intuition talking to her, but that doesn't really matter, whatever you want to see it. But she told me which was a very inspiring thing, and that just fucked me up so deeply, because I could tell that there was something here that I spent my whole life trying to do, and this was invalidating my entire approach to everything. And that's when I started to truly understand that all the stuff I had read about how spirituality is effortless, I started to realize that it's not just about listening. Everything is perfectly managed without any effort. And that's the only way it can be perfectly managed, because the effort reduces the quality of it, because the effort is unnecessary. The effort is like putting something in a recipe that isn't necessary. If you put something into a recipe that isn't necessary, it's going to make the recipe worse. You can't put something in that's neutral. If you put too much sugar in, it's going to become too sweet. Put too much flour in, it's going to become too chewy. Anything unnecessary makes the quality worse. And so effort is always unnecessary.
And that won't make any sense to the logical mind or the ego, because
exactly. And why is that?
It's because we've heard that so many times in our life. Effort equals results, or equals kind of some kind of benefit that you get from putting effort in.
And because the logical mind and the ego is effort, it is nothing but effort. So when you tell that part of your mind that it's not effort, You're saying, I don't need you at all for anything. And it's not going to want to hear that, right? Because
Yeah.
then that's the end of it.
The beginning of the end. I don't know why that's funny, but like I can't help myself laughing at that. I don't know. It's an interesting kind of.
And it comes back to this statement that one of my masters said, which I love, is that the last step of yoga is the first step of tantra. And so everyone knows yoga. Either they know the practical part, or they know that it's also a spiritual tradition and it's enlightenment through effort. You train all this stuff, these positions. You do a lot of work. Well, this quote says that when the yogi attains the highest state, he or she just starts to let go and leave things as they are. But the tantric, he starts there. He just lets go from the very beginning. It doesn't need all the preparatory work. And that's why what you and I do is so important, because we have done a lot of work and it was all in vain, completely pointless. But if we can find one person who has the spiritual capacity to understand, you can start by letting go, then they can skip so many years or so many effort, and they can just go straight to, oh yeah, I can be loose and natural. That's the whole thing. And I can be loose and natural without effort. And then boom, the ego is gone. It can't do anything. If you understand that, if you just live your life like a happy idiot, not knowing anything, just free and natural, then that's it. There's nothing more. And the ego isn't useful in that situation at all. You don't need the robot. Everything is perfectly managed. There's no problem. So that's a very valuable thing. And I didn't have the spiritual capacity to understand that straight away. And you didn't either, because I'm sure we both read it in the books we read. We heard someone say it because it's everywhere. We didn't have the capacity to go straight there, but some people do. And the people who don't, well, now they are now they're able to not just read about it, but hear someone talk about it, hear someone
Reflect
embody it.
and body, yeah.
Yeah.
Live
And
it
so they can get there in half the time, right? Or in a fourth of the time.
directly to the path. But it's
Straight to the point.
straight to the point. Yeah. But it's a beautiful thing to kind of to be able to begin to let go or fully let go and just allow yourself to be free and allow yourself to know that you are whole, that you're enough, and that you're exactly the person that you are, and just kind of like share that part of you, give yourself and the permission to be, and with whatever comes up in this spontaneous moment, and that's what we want for you, and it's a beautiful thing to come from that place, and there can be so much fear and so much blockages and barriers in our lives, or people that remind ourselves to come back into the rules and come back into the unconscious part. Yeah, the box,
Stay
right?
in the box.
Stay in the
Yeah.
box. And here we are kind of talking about there's another way, and this way is within you, and it's always there. It's just waiting for you to let go of all the layers. And when you let go of these layers one by one, then you're left with this pure consciousness, this pure you. And that is whole, and that is just a beautiful shining part of yourself, just waiting to be yeah, freed up, and that's through this path. So that's what we would like. That's not the only that's what we want for you, but that's there, that's available. And so
Yeah.
hopefully from this conversation, you're one step closer to becoming aware of that does exist within you. and doing the work on yourself, that is there, and that is possible, and it is worthwhile without putting, like we talked about, without putting crazy amount of effort into it, but by
Yeah.
simply letting go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Effort is, if you if you don't know what to do, then you use effort, right? That's if you don't have intelligence. That's why if you don't know that you can use the wind to sail a boat, then you're gonna build a big motor which basically works on explosions, right? And destroys the environment because you don't have intelligence, so you have to use effort, you have to use force, right? So force is stupidity, and effortlessness, that's intelligence. Because you're working with what is inside you, everything inside you, everything outside you, you work with it. You said, like, this episode is going to be called, you said something really, really good. You said, give yourself permission to be. And that is a title we're going to have to be using for like some of our stuff, because that is, I think, that is one of the deepest messages like I've heard that put into words. Like, give yourself permission to be. That encapsulates like the whole thing, right?
Straight to the source.
Yeah, I mean, that goes so deep.
Yeah.
Right? Is there anything on the tail end here?
Nothing from me. To anything you want to add to today's conversation?
Yeah, I want to say, give yourself permission to be.
Give yourself permission to be.
Let that sink in. That's really something. And see you on the trail.